It is 9 days before Christmas. The sky over Brooklyn is torn open. There was no warning. Just a sound loud enough to rattle windows blocks away, followed by fire pouring down the middle of a residential street. Somewhere above the clouds, two of the era's most flown airliners had just occupied the exact same piece of sky. Neither crew ever saw it coming. What caused it was not a mechanical failure. It wasn't a storm, nor was it anything dramatic enough to make headlines on its own. It came down to a handful of small, innocuous decisions by people who had no reason to think today would be any different. By nightfall, 134 people would be dead. It remains, to this day, one of the deadliest air disasters in American history. This is the true story of the 1960 New York midair collision. Welcome to Tragic Flights. Every tragedy has a story, every disaster has a cause, and every flight leaves lessons behind. If you never want to miss the stories behind these events, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future episodes of Tragic Flights. Let's begin. Friday, December 16th, 1960, O'Hare Airport, Chicago. United Airlines Flight 826, pushed back to 9:11 a.m., is now in the air. A Douglas DC-8 named mainliner Will Rogers, bound for Idlewild Airport in New York. 84 people were aboard, 77 passengers, 7 crew. The jet itself was still new to passenger service. This exact aircraft type had entered commercial use just the year before, and nothing had ever gone fatally wrong with one, not once, anywhere in the country. At the controls sat Captain Robert Sawyer, 46, with more than 19,000 flight hours behind him. At almost the same time, a second flight was already in the air. TWA Flight 266 on its final leg to LaGuardia Airport, carrying 44 people after stops in Dayton and Columbus. Both flights were flying into the same grey soup, a low overcast a few hundred feet over the city, fog, drizzle, the leftovers of snow that had already fallen days earlier. Nothing unusual for New York in December. Nothing either crew hadn't handled 100 times before. Both jets were also flying under a system built specifically to keep aircraft like this apart. Separate corridors, separate holding points, separate controllers watching each one home. On paper, there was no way these two flights should have ever shared the same airspace. 9 minutes after United's jet leveled off, its crew radioed in one small equipment problem. The kind of thing that happens on flights every day, all over the country. Nobody on the ground had any idea how much that one problem was about to matter. Airliners in 1960 didn't have GPS. Pilots found their way by tuning radio beacons scattered across the ground and tracking the exact point where two of those invisible signals crossed, checkpoints in empty sky, with names like Preston, Robbinsville, Colts Neck. United's DC-8 carried 2 separate receivers built to pick up those signals. A deliberate backup in case one ever failed. At 10:21 a.m., one did. The crew radioed it in, not to air traffic control, but to the airline's own communications relay. The message reached United's maintenance desk in Chicago. That's as far as it went. Air traffic control, the one team actually responsible for keeping this jet separated from every other aircraft over New York that morning, was never told a single receiver was down. Nobody hid it. Nobody buried it on purpose. Nobody in that cockpit thought one dead receiver, with a working backup still online, was worth flagging to a controller already juggling a full frequency of traffic. That single, ordinary judgment call quietly removed one of the last safety nets standing between Flight 826 and disaster. And it was about to get harder to catch, because 4 minutes later, the men trying to help this flight along were about to hand it something that made the next mistake even easier to make. At 10:25 a.m., air traffic control radioed United 826 with what sounded like good news. Instead of the long way to their assigned holding point, a fix called Preston, out past the New Jersey coast, controllers offered a straighter line. It would save time, they said. It shaved 11 miles off the route. United's crew said thanks and took it. Why wouldn't they? Fewer miles usually means less circling, less fuel burned, happier passengers landing sooner. Nobody on either end of that radio call meant any harm. The controller was doing his job well. The pilots were doing theirs. But finding Preston with a fully working navigation system already meant returning frequencies, tracking 2 separate radio courses, and timing it all by hand. With one receiver down, that entire job now fell to a single instrument and whatever the crew could track through memory, watching the clock, judging distance, trusting their own arithmetic. And that arithmetic had just been thrown off by 11 miles nobody had told them to recalculate, descending fast, flying a cockpit that suddenly had more to track than it was built to handle with half its instruments. United 826 was closing in on the one invisible line in the sky it was never supposed to cross. By 10:30, United 826 was dropping through 14,000 feet, cleared down to 5,000, the altitude, where it was supposed to level off, slow down, and start circling at Preston until New York had room to bring it in. Standard holding speed at that altitude, 210 knots or slower. United's jet crossed the collision point doing 301. 90 knots over the limit, descending at more than 3,600 feet a minute. A jet built to cruise near the edge of the atmosphere was now threading through some of the busiest airspace in the country, faster than anyone on the ground had reason to expect. At 10:33 and 20 seconds, controllers handed the flight off one final time. Contact Idlewild approach. United's crew signed off with a cheerful, "Good day." Seconds later came their last transmission ever. Idlewild approach control, United 826, approaching Preston at 5,000. They meant every word of it. In their minds, Preston was still somewhere ahead. They'd actually blown past it by 11 miles. Idlewild approach answered back with fresh instructions and the local weather. Nobody in that cockpit ever heard a word of it, because on a completely different frequency, a LaGuardia controller watching a completely different airplane had just spotted something on his radar screen that didn't belong there at all. TWA Flight 266 wasn't United's problem, and it wasn't even on the same radio frequency. TWA was deep into its own approach into LaGuardia, descending, completely unaware any of this was happening. But LaGuardia's controller could see something United's own controllers couldn't: a live radar screen. And on it, a fast, unidentified target was closing in on TWA 266 from behind. At 10:32 and 47 seconds, he radioed a warning. Traffic at 2:30, 6 miles out. TWA acknowledged it. New York skies were full of traffic, and calls like that rarely amounted to anything. 39 seconds later, the same controller came back, and this time his voice had changed. That appears to be jet traffic off your right now, 3 o'clock at 1 mile. Yes, closing at hundreds of miles an hour, through cloud and fog that neither cockpit could see through. TWA's crew had seconds. Not enough to spot it, not enough to move. At 10:33 a.m., roughly 5,000 feet above Staten Island, United's right engine tore into the constellation just ahead of its wings. 6 seconds of raw static hit the LaGuardia frequency, the sound of 2 airplanes meeting in midair. Then nothing, from either aircraft. Somewhere above Staten Island, 2 heavily damaged airplanes were now falling toward the ground. The Constellation went first. Its fuselage torn open, it rolled into a spiral and came apart as it fell, scattering across Miller Field on Staten Island, pieces landing in the harbor. All 44 people aboard died on impact. There would be no survivors from TWA 266. United's DC-8 was luckier in the cruelest possible sense. Missing an engine and a chunk of its right wing, it kept flying anyway for 90 more seconds. A crippled jet carrying 84 people held together over some of the most densely packed real estate on Earth. Then it ran out of sky. It came down nose first in Park Slope, Brooklyn, at the corner of Sterling Place and 7th Avenue. The impact carved a trench down the middle of the street and set 10 brownstones ablaze, along with a funeral home, a laundromat, a delicatessen, and almost too fitting to be real, a church called the Pillar of Fire. Wrapped Christmas presents, still packed in passengers' luggage, ended up scattered across the sidewalk. The wreckage missed a nearby Catholic school holding more than 1,000 children by a matter of yards. It missed 2 gas stations that would have turned Sterling Place into something far worse. 6 people on the ground never made it home that day, including Wallace Lewis, the 90-year-old caretaker of the very church that burned, and 2 men who'd set up a stand on the corner, selling Christmas trees for the holiday just 9 days away. 83 of the 84 people aboard United's jet died instantly. 1 did not. 11-year-old Stephen Boltz had boarded United 826 alone in Chicago that morning, flying unaccompanied to spend Christmas with relatives in Yonkers. In his final conscious hours, he told a doctor what he remembered seeing out his window just before the collision. The city below, he said, looked like a picture out of a fairy book. Then, in his words, an explosion. When the DC-8 broke apart over Brooklyn, he was thrown clear of the wreckage and landed in a snowbank on the street below. The snow did what nothing else that morning could. It smothered his burning clothes before the fire could finish what the crash had started. He was alive, conscious, talking. Severely burned, having breathed in burning jet fuel, Stephen was rushed to Methodist Hospital, the sole survivor of the deadliest air disaster the world had ever recorded. He held on through the day, through the night. He died the next morning of pneumonia, from what that fuel had already done to his lungs. For one night, an entire city had something to hold on to in the middle of the worst thing that had ever happened to it. By morning, that was gone too. What remained was a question federal investigators would spend the next 1.5 years trying to fully answer. How does a fully crewed, radio-equipped, radar-assisted airliner fly 11 miles past a checkpoint and never notice? The Civil Aeronautics Board had a tool no crash investigation had fully relied on before, a flight data recorder pulled intact from United's wreckage. It was one of the first accidents in history where investigators could reconstruct a jet's exact altitude, heading, and speed, second by second, instead of piecing it together from wreckage alone. United 826 had flown beyond its clearance and into airspace it was never authorized to enter. That was the board's central finding. Contributing to it, the jet's high speed nearing Preston and a shortcut clearance that quietly erased 11 miles from the crew's mental math that was already stretched thin by one dead receiver. No single moment caused this crash. It took all of them, stacked in exactly the wrong order, on exactly the wrong morning. Investigators were careful about one thing too. United had argued that a ground navigation beacon near Colt's Neck was unreliable that day. They tested it. The beacon worked fine. Whatever went wrong happened inside that cockpit, not on the ground. Aviation had promised the jet age would be safer than anything that came before it. Radar was supposed to make collisions like this obsolete. Instead, over the most crowded city in America, both promises broke at once, and what happened next would rewrite the rule book for every flight that followed. Within weeks, regulators closed the exact gap that doomed Flight 826. Pilots are now legally required to report equipment failures like that dead receiver directly to air traffic control, not just their own airline. Every turbine aircraft in the country was ordered fitted with distance measuring equipment, giving both pilots and controllers a hard number instead of a guess. Airliners today still slow to 250 knots below 10,000 feet near an airport. That rule didn't exist before this crash. It exists because of it. There's one more rule that traces straight back to this crash too. Controllers are now required to warn every arriving jet to slow to holding speed a full 3 minutes before it reaches the holding point, not after, the way it worked in 1960. Among the passengers aboard United 826 was Jonas Kamlet, a chemist whose small 2-person lab had already patented a glucose test, one of the first pregnancy detection strips, and a method for turning old newsprint into livestock feed. His wife and lab partner, Edna, kept the business running for almost 2 more decades after he never came home. And in one of aviation history's strangest near misses, mountaineer Sir Edmund Hillary, the first man to summit Everest, was booked on that very flight. He simply arrived at the airport too late to board. 50 years later, in 2010, a memorial rose in Brooklyn's Greenwood Cemetery, carrying the names of all 134 who never came home that December. Rest in peace to all 134 lives lost aboard United Flight 826, TWA Flight 266, and on the ground in Park Slope, Brooklyn. If this story moved you, make sure to share it, leave a like, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode of Tragic Flights.